Hello, welcome to Today in the World, where I will be talking about news stories from around the world and giving you my thoughts. Before I get into the news story today, I will be updating you on some of the other news stories we have discussed in the past. I'm going to start with Venezuela, and then there's updates for what's happening in Bangladesh, the student riots, what had originally started out as the student riots. There's more going on with the Philippines again in terms of the South China Sea. The Middle East obviously is still an ongoing situation, and I'll be taking a look at all of that. First of all, I'm going to start with Venezuela because Nicolas Maduro has been officially ratified as the president of Venezuela by the election authority. They haven't released any voting tallies that prove he won, and recently there was a rally held in Caracas by the opposition leader Machado. She did make an appearance. I heard it was a surprise appearance. That's what has been reported on the ground anyway. The opposition president, Gonzalez, did not make an appearance. And this comes after Machado had spent a week in hiding. And I guess it would be fair to assume that Gonzalez is still in hiding. Um, Maybe waiting to see if there will be enough pressure for Maduro to step down. I feel like that's unlikely. They did launch, the opposition party did launch a website, and they posted copies of 84% of the votes counted, or I guess ballots cast. And apparently, according to these 84% of the ballots that were cast that they have copies of, this shows an easy win for Gonzalez. Obviously, the Maduro government has claimed that these are false. I know I said yesterday that it was weird that the opposition didn't it hasn't showed us like proof of their evidence that they won. I suppose this would be the proof that they're showing us now. And obviously, I think that, in my opinion anyway, that the opposition government should be the actual government of Venezuela. Um, I think that would be better for the Venezuelans, considering the economic downturn that the country has faced for the past couple of years. Um, but the problem is, of course, when a leader of a country gets into office and they've been in office long enough to put their allies into the election commission, into the Supreme Court, as leaders of the military, when they have time to support their allies into getting offices in their Congress or their Senate or whatever they have over there, it is nigh on impossible to forcibly remove them from office. So yeah, like the citizens of Venezuela, I don't think they really have any real chance at actually removing Maduro from office just due to how ingrained the system is against them. It doesn't help when the whole country has been disarmed. Obviously, if the citizens don't have guns, what real way do they have to fight back against the military or the police? They don't really have any way to do that. Um, I feel like this really should be a lesson to Western citizens, not Western governments, because I think Western governments are looking to pull this kind of power themselves, honestly. I think that's part of the reason that they continually try to disarm their citizens. But when citizens let themselves get disarmed, they allow a takeover by a communist government or by any kind of tyrannical government. These governments get easy access to controlling power. And then, even though we see this happen over and over again, we continually have citizens in these Western countries pushing for more and more gun rights to be taken away. Like they don't understand what's going on. And this just leads me to assume that they have no idea what's going on and they really need to properly educate themselves outside the halls of so called education. Um, I'm not a huge supporter of the school systems because they're run by the government. Anyway, moving on from Venezuela, it's not really an update. I did say it was an update to the South China Sea story. I wouldn't really call it an update, but it's related anyway. Essentially, the Philippines has, well, not the Philippines. The Philippines and Germany have, or not have, but they are looking to finalize a defensive pact for joint military training with the potential of German weapons sales to address security threats related to China in the South China Sea. They're looking to sign that before the end of the year. It looks like Manila is really looking to lock down defensive pacts to deter Chinese aggression in the region. They have been pushing back against the series of confrontations they've been having with China in the South China Sea regarding the Chinese Coast Guard and Philippine fishing boats. I did cover this in a previous, episode. So if you missed that, you can go back and catch up on it. This also comes after Manila had held a series of joint training sessions in the South China Sea with Tokyo. Very specifically, it looks like the Philippine defense minister wants to work with Germany, particularly on armament projects, on education and training of their soldiers, and on military cybersecurity. This is important because I think we've seen a lot of unconfirmed Chinese attacks on in the cyberspace. So the fact that they do want education and training on cybersecurity, I think, is a prescient and good move on their part. The German defense minister also brought up the idea of possible cooperation in areas of air defense, naval defense, and military transport aircraft. This would be a huge boon to the government of Manila, because there's an argument to be made that China is the only cause of tensions in the South China Sea because of their continued attempts to make illegal and unilateral territorial claims upon the whole region. When, if we look at international law, not a fan of the UN, but anyways, if we look at what's been established in international law, a large portion of the South China Sea should be international waters. Germany is doing this to ensure and uphold a rules-based international order. I've also heard there's a recent announcement by the United States to allocate $500 million in military funding to the Philippines. This comes as Manila is facing financial constraints to address the challenges in the South China Sea and any disputes they have with China. The $500 million comes from a fund of $2 billion that has been okayed by Congress, the U.S. Congress, for use in Indo-Pacific region to confront Chinese aggression. I do fall more under the isolationist umbrella, just as a general rule of thumb. But there are times where I do understand that. I don't understand that, but I understand why governments will support other governments, even if I don't agree with them dishing out money to do this. I like the idea of deterring Chinese aggression in the region. I don't like the idea of forking out $2 billion to deter Chinese aggression. Like, I'm sure there are other ways to do it. If you're facing financial constraints, maybe look at why you're facing financial constraints. I don't think it should always fall to Western countries to be financing other countries all the time. I think other countries should learn to finance themselves. And I think because of the growing debt crisis in the West, the Western countries should also look at maybe financing themselves out of debt before they continually look overseas to finance other countries. Anyways, that's just my thought on the story. I know there's problems with isolationism, but I think there's also large benefits that could be earned. And in regards to isolationism, I don't necessarily mean trade isolationism, because I do think there are a lot of benefits to international trade. Anyways, I'm going to move on to the next story update of Bangladesh. For those of you who might have missed it, just a quick recap. There were protests in Bangladesh that were originally happening because of a job quota system for government jobs. The Supreme Court in Bangladesh did almost completely abolished the quota system that they had there. I believe the quota system is now down to maybe 2 or 3% of government jobs. But they did do this. The government did agree with it, but the protesters had a problem with, I guess, the amount of injuries and deaths that occurred from the original protests, that their new protests are anti-government protests, which have started to demand the resignation of the prime minister. Um, I did cover this a couple days ago. I don't want to cover the student protests, but I am going to talk a little bit about the government protests that are happening now. Just to quickly give you what's happening there. It's been reported that 91 people have been killed. This includes 13 police officers, and this has happened in a new round of violence against the government. The police fired tear gas and lobbed stun grenades to disperse tens of thousands of protesters. Prime Minister Hasina has said that those who are engaging in sabotage and destruction in the name of protests are no longer students, but they are criminals, and they will be dealt with an iron hand from the state. The authorities have blocked internet access and have imposed a pretty crazy curfew, a shoot-on-sight curfew. In recent weeks, 11,000 people have been arrested there. The current government is claiming that the protests have been taken over by the Islamic Party due to the demand for Prime Minister Hasina's resignation. The at least decent thing with Prime Minister Hasina is that she has at least offered to sit down and talk with student leaders, but the student leaders have refused. She has also said that she's willing to talk with these protesters whenever they want to sit down and talk with her. It's tough because blocking internet access and imposing shoot-on-sight curfew orders, it does not look good from the outside. It's tough to justify that, but if her offers to talk with the protesters and with the student leaders is legitimate, I think that's a heck of a lot better of an offer than the Prime Minister of Canada offered during Canada's protests. I honestly think that no matter which side of the issue you fall on, her offer is it makes it look good. It doesn't make it look good, but it makes it look not so bad, I should say. And I think it makes it look a lot better than Canada's government did, because the protests in Canada, at least, they weren't violent protests. So it's yeah. Western governments, man. I don't know. I don't freaking know. I don't like. They got what they wanted, Like the quota system had been abolished. So I personally think they should sit down with the prime minister and at least see if they can come to some sort of agreement, or see if she can do something about their grievances. Because, I mean, yeah, I understand a little bit why they're still protesting. I do. But if you have an offer to sit down with the person you're protesting against, and it's a legitimate offer, and you can get your grievances aired and maybe addressed, then I think that the protests should no longer be happening, or at least should be put on pause until the meeting is concluded. Because otherwise it kind of just looks like they're protesting out of spite. Yeah, it is what it is, I guess. And then the last update I'm going to talk about comes from the Middle East. The Canadian government had upgraded its advisory risk for travel to Israel to its highest level, basically urging Canadians to not travel to Israel at all. The Canadian government has said that armed conflict will hinder commercial flights, and that any Canadians who are in the Middle East in a conflict region should not expect any assistance in evacuation. If you are a Canadian citizen inside Israel, inside Lebanon, inside Iran, it's basically a get out now kind of situation. It's the same kind of thing that the U.S. has recently said, but the U.S. has did talk about this earlier, but the U.S. does have an amphibious water vehicle that can be used for quick evacuations in the area. And then the UK also urged its citizens to do a similar thing, as well as France. Um, Essentially, what these governments are saying is if you're in the region, get out. If you can avoid traveling around the region, do so. That's basically what's happening in the Middle East right now. Sweden has shut down its embassy in Beirut, Lebanon, due to fears of general conflict. They did relocate their embassy to Cyprus, and they've also urged their citizens to leave Lebanon. Um, they've had a travel warning in the region since 2023, and the Swedish government, or I guess the Swedish government, foreign ministry particularly, estimates around 1,000 Swedish nationals are in Lebanon. That's just according to what they have written down. There could be more that were just not documented. The Danish embassy in Lebanon is still open, so just a little thing, They're both Norwegian countries, so not. That's wrong. That's wrong. But they're countries in a similar region of the world. So that's why I just brought up the little Danish thing. Anyway. There have been no other countries that have followed Sweden's footsteps in temporarily closing their embassies that I've seen reported anyway. And then the last thing I want to touch on that's going on in the Middle East is that Jordan had sent a diplomat to make a visit to Iran today to talk about potential the regional developments. This comes amid diplomatic efforts by the United States and its Western allies to mitigate further escalation in the area. It's reported that Jordan is calling for calm in the region and for Iran and Hezbollah and any other Iranian-backed terrorist organizations to avoid retaliatory strikes, because an escalation to a larger regional war would have a devastating impact on everyone in the region. Just a note that Jordan is one of the U.S.'s allies in the region and has been assisting shooting down missiles that have been shot at Israel. And this is the first time in 20 years that a senior Jordanian official has traveled to Iran in an official visit. Even though there's calling for calm, I wouldn't be surprised to see more Iranian-backed terrorist groups attacking Israel in the near future. But I hope that it doesn't devolve into regional war, because it's likely that other countries could be pulled into this war, or other countries could be pulled into funding this war. And also, due to a lack of developed oil resources in the West, we either have to rely more heavily on dictators, or we will see an increase in oil prices because of the conflict. Just an interesting note is that Venezuela has oil reserves. So I guess I'm a bit of a masochist when I say that it's interesting to watch these stories develop, because I find myself right in the age range for a draft. And yet I do find it interesting to watch these stories develop. Oh, man. And I haven't even talked about the Ukraine-Russia war at all. I am just going to quickly touch on Ukrainian accusations against Russia. I don't really want to get into it. I'm not too interested in accusations that lack proof. Let me see the evidence. I guess the evidence is there's a picture going around of someone who was decapitated. And there have been accusations that they're abusing their POWs. Russia's abusing their Ukrainian POWs. And they're using this photograph as evidence. I haven't really looked into whether this photograph is legit, like if it's been photoshopped at all or not, or any number of things that could potentially be wrong with it, whether it's staged or something like that. Um, it's important because, like, when we were watching the start of this war, it seemed like there's a lot of propaganda coming out from both ends of the war. And I worry that this could potentially be another piece of propaganda. Of course, if Russia is treating their POWs this way, that's absolutely horrific. Um, I would hope that there's no credible government on earth that would treat POWs this way or anyone this way. But the cynic in me thinks that governments around the world are willing to treat people horribly. I just wanted to touch on that real quick. I haven't talked about the war at all. And largely that's been due to the amount of propaganda I've seen on either side. So I've been very hesitant to touch on it. Um, but I did just want to give you that latest development. You can look into it yourself and come to your own conclusions. I think, critical thinking skills are important. So now would not be a bad time to develop those. The worst time to develop those is never. Start now. And then I'm going to talk about the new story that's happening today. This is the British protests that are growing. So recently there's been unrest in the UK and there have been protesters who are vandalizing a hotel that is housing asylum seekers. It looks like these are some of the worst riots that the UK has seen in nigh on 13 years. The police have prevented the protesters from entering. The protests, riots, whatever you want to call it. I know the left-wing media will call it riots. They call anything that they don't like riots. I'm going to call it protests because I don't know. I just don't like the mainstream media, so I'm just going to not use their words. So I'm just going to call it protest. Anyway, these protests come as the latest bout following a stabbing rampage at a dance class in northern England. 3 young girls were killed. There was a 6-year-old that was killed. There was a 7-year-old that was killed. And there was a 9-year-old that was killed. There were 5 children that were in critical condition. And 3 other were injured. And there were 2 adults who were injured trying to shield the children. The police had not named a suspect. And the killing happened like early last week. So I don't know why they haven't named a suspect. I think it's justifiable that people have come to assumptions that it probably wasn't a white person, considering how the media covers stabbings. I honestly think that because they haven't said anything about it, I think that it's justifiable to say it probably wasn't a white guy. That's just considering the way the media is in the West. That's the way they tend to cover stories. It looks like the protests are not only aimed at getting justice for these children, but they're also aimed at pushing back immigration that's been happening in Western countries recently. If there are children listening, maybe cover their ears for a second, because I'm just going to say this real quick. Considering all the rape that's being reported by what look to be illegal immigrants, that I'm surprised it took this long for protests to break out against the immigration that's happening in the UK. I'm disappointed that protests like this aren't happening in more Western countries, honestly. That's all I have for you today. As always, if I've missed any international stories, please let me know. I can be reached via my email, todayintheworld@gmail.com. Oh, todayintheworld2024@gmail.com, sorry. I should know that. And in the comment section of wherever you watch this. Most of my news comes from ground news. I really like ground news. They tell you the leaning of the article. They will tell you how factual they find the article, and sometimes they'll tell you like almost where the article comes from, I guess. Sometimes I'll get like leads from X, and then I will look for articles about those leads just to see if it's rumors, if it's confirmed, things like that. I hope this was informative and you listened to me next time. I'll continue to monitor all these stories and let you know what's happening today in the world. And just as an aside, I normally end here, but just a little, I guess, quick update. I'm looking at getting like a world map, and then I can kind of put that in the background. And then when I'm talking about all these different countries, I can kind of point to the countries on the map, and that way we can learn a little bit of geography while I'm talking about these international news stories. And I think politicians would really benefit from the geography. I think I'd be helping them quite a bit. Anyways, see you next time.